Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Those who are new to the channel, my name's Sean, also known as Film Guru, and I started this channel to have my say on films and a variety of film content. So thanks for viewing today. Today I'm continuing on my horror reviews, and this time I'm looking at Scream. This is one of my favourite horror films of all time, and I really love this whole series of movies, but the first and second one are probably my favourites. But I really love that this breathes new life and breath of fresh air into the slasher genre, and it did it in such a great way. This was directed by the late great Wes Craven, who had a real understanding of horror and delivered such a great film, and it was written by Kevin Williamson, who'd go on to write a variety of other horror films, has also become a director and create Dawson's Creek and The Following. And this has a really great cast. Neve Campbell, who coming off the back and during her time on Party of Five, plays a really great character in Sydney, a character we can connect to, believe in and get behind, and a really great final girl. Rose McGowan playing Tatum, I thought she was really great in this. Courtney Cox is really great as well as Gale Weathers, breaking free of the Friends and trying to do something different, and I like that. Obviously you've got Matthew Lillard and Skeet Ulrich, who are really great as the ghost faces in this film. And David Arquette is really great as Dewey. He's kind of a silly, goofy character in the first film, but he becomes such a great character, particularly in the fifth film. And I really love what he does here. It's a really young and fresh cast. Jamie Kennedy's another one who's really good as Randy. Randy's our guide through this film. Has watched a lot of slasher films and horror films, and he sort of starts to talk about what he thinks is going on, and he's pretty spot on with a lot of it, and I love that. He felt, for us film geeks, he felt like the character we connected to or could connect to the most. This has so many great sequences in it. The whole opening sequence with Drew Barrymore playing Casey, the cat and mouse on the phone and what transpires in this scene is absolutely fantastic. Wes Craven decided to do what Alfred Hitchcock did with Janet Leigh in the original Psycho. Setting up this character like Casey, a character we sort of think we're going to follow through the film, and killing them off. And I thought that was a really smart and interesting way to go about this sort of film, and something really refreshing and interesting. And that all comes down to Wes Craven's idea, but also the way that Kevin Williamson wrote the script. Kevin Williamson wrote this film pretty much in 1 or 2 days, and he drew a lot of inspiration from Real Fact and other horror films, but there was a real bidding war for this film, and ultimately it was bought by Miramax, who brought on Wes Craven to direct. And the collaboration between Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson continued on all the way through the other films, and I really liked their collaboration. But this was the first example of that. And I think that what makes this film so great is it sort of didn't take itself too seriously. There's a lot of humor in it. It's kind of a meta film. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's very relevant to the time and place, especially the 90s in regards to these particular movies. And like I've said in many other videos, this was the film that spawned so many slasher films to come out afterwards. Reinvented the genre and brought something unique and different, and it really put Wes Craven on the map. Even though he had done Nightmare on Elm Street, this was the film where people started to take a bit more notice of him, in my opinion anyway. On this particular viewing, I noticed a lot more things. Now, I've seen this film over 100 times, and every now and again I'll put it on, especially on a Friday night if I want something really good to watch. But each time I watch it, I drew something more from it. I guess as I've gotten older, I start to see more in the film than I did before. Like I mentioned, there's many great sequences in it, especially the opening sequence. And I really like the sequence in Sydney's house where she's getting attacked by Ghostface and what she does there, and how she shows the killer how strong she is and won't take his shit and calls him on his bullshit, only to be attacked and run upstairs. As the killer disappears, that's when Billy appears. And now, in my opinion, you can look at Billy appearing in a variety of different ways and thinking that maybe he's just there to look like a hero. But I think it's more of the fact he puts himself there to make him look like he's an innocent victim in this whole thing, that he isn't involved in any aspect, and that he come there to help her. And that sort of clears his name in a little while. Yes, he gets arrested and he does get looked at, but he gets let go. And then as the film unfolds, you start to see who he actually is and what involvement he does have in the whole murder aspect. There is a scene at the start where we skip from Casey's death to ultimately meeting and being introduced to our actual final girl, Sydney, who's at home typing on a computer. When Billy appears to her in the window and they have this conversation and we learn more about who they are. And we learn that Sydney's father is going away and that she'll be alone, be in the house by herself. And we also learn what happened, like a bit of aspect what happened to Sydney's mother in a small way. I think the whole point of this sequence, Billy appearing to Sydney, is to distract her why Stu kidnaps the father. Because the father disappears, this is a perfect moment to kidnap him, to distract her so she doesn't really know that it's happened. But it just feels like this is what transpires, especially later in the film when he appears again. And it's like, where has he been this whole time? How long has he been missing? And I think this was the sequence that really is where he disappears. When you've seen this film a number of times, and they start to do it in the other films, when there's a single character and that character starts to describe what happened in the particular murder, that tends to be the killer. They did it in this film, they did it in the second film, they did it in the third in a way, and they do it in the fourth as well. It's just sort of this aspect to the movie that you start to take notice. And Stu's a great example of that. After everything's happened and we meet the whole cast and they're sitting down having lunch together and talking about what happened, Stu really talks about some details that most people wouldn't know about the killings. And that really sort of puts him in an interesting light, and you start to question maybe he is the killer. But there are a lot of red herrings throughout, so it sort of throws you off. But this is an example of how when a character mentions something about the death and the killings, they're usually the one who is the killer. But I really like what they did with Billy too. You didn't quite know it was him, and then when it's revealed, you're kind of surprised. After he gets stabbed and then Sydney sees him again falling down the stairs, and then we find out who he really is and his motives, and then it's revealed Stu is involved. I loved all of that aspect of the film as well. There is a couple of things in the film that I found contradictory a little bit, and there are a couple of things I thought were really funny. There is a couple of sequences where Tatum and Sydney are talking at Tatum's house, and as they go inside, Ghostface appears in the bush watching them. I always found this scene hilariously funny. I don't know if it was meant to be, but the fact that there's a masked killer appearing in daylight and walking through the area no one notices was hilarious. And they do the same thing when Tatum and Sydney are buying stuff at the grocery store for Stu's party later that night. And you see the masked killer's reflection in the fridge door. I always thought that was really weird and bizarre, and it always makes me laugh when I see it. There is something else I noticed as well. There's an inconsistency with what happened to Sydney's mother, Maureen Prescott. When we first hear about what happened, they say in a news report that she was found in the middle of town, dead. But then later you start to watch the TV interview in regards to Cotton being arrested, and that Sydney saw him leaving the house wearing the coat. So as far as I gather, Maureen was already dead. So how did they find her in the middle of town? It just feels like there's a bit of a conflicting story there. Maybe I didn't register it enough, but it just felt a bit conflicting. But the only couple of things that I thought were a bit silly and were a bit contradictory. Other than that, I've always thought this film was really, really great. I just always impressed by it. I always pick up new things watching the film, and I return to it time after time. And it's really the film that got me into the slasher genre. It's the film that really inspired me to write my own stuff in a way. I wrote a script when I was 16 in regards to it. And subsequently, it led me on to other films in this genre, and this became my favourite subgenre in the horror genre itself. And yes, I went back and watched Friday the 13th and all these other films as well, but this was sort of the first film that really threw me into these sort of movies. It's a kind of film that keeps you guessing right to the end, like a great thriller is. And this is what this film more feels like. Less like a horror film and more like a thriller. Yes, there is the masked killer like you see in this particular genre, but there's also these thriller elements where anyone could be the killer and we don't know who they are, and it sort of gets us to work out and think about who we think the killer might be. There's a mystery to it, and that's what I really love. And I really love the third act of the film, the party sequence, everything that transpires there, the sequence in the garage where Tatum gets killed, where Sydney gets attacked, where the killer appears, and then you've got Randy and you've got all these other characters that appear that get attacked and get hurt. And that sequence of Randy sitting on the chair, watching Halloween, talking about, yelling to the screen, he's behind you, all the while the ghost face appears behind him, and then they're also watching that on a screen itself in Kenny's van. I think that's really interesting, very meta, very relevant, and very clever. And there is so much humor in this film that just seeps through. And it took me quite a long time to see this as satire. As I got older, I started to notice that it was kind of taking the piss out of the genre, but not too much that it becomes campy or silly, much like what happens with the third film. And I have become a huge fan of Scream 2 after this is a great continuation. If you haven't seen Scream, which will be really strange if you haven't, but if you haven't, it's definitely worth checking out. It's a really great and entertaining horror film that really captures something unique and different and refreshing at the time. And it is still an important film within this genre. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom. Follow my Letterboxd and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.